Thank you, Wade. I appreciate that. It's a great name. It's my husband's name, too, who's also here. Are you indicating you can't hear me? I'll speak up. There we go. Is that better? Good. Okay. And along with Wade this morning, our friends Sonia and Jody are here, who love dogs, as we do. So we're glad to have them here. I want to thank Stell for arranging this opportunity, and Charlene for recommending it. She's not feeling well, so she's not here today. But at a memorial that Wade and I attended for a neighbor at Manuel's Tavern, she suggested that I talk about our dogs in this installment of my speaking to you. So I thought I would. I enjoy talking about Calvin and Hobbes, so appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much. And thank you for the song, wherever you went. Anyway, but they did come running, so it was great to have them in our lives. And was there something else I wanted to say? No? That's it. So, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. The gay, Catholic, Jesuit priest and poet Gerard Manley Hopkins famously wrote, I first saw this quote in 1976 on the invitation to a priest ordination in Philadelphia. I met that priest the night in 1975 that I arrived in Philadelphia to enjoy a year-long campus ministry internship with the Christian Association of the University of Pennsylvania. I had just arrived there between my second and third year of seminary at Yale Divinity School. Having always been both a worker and a student, it felt like paradise to focus on ministry in a city I grew to love, working with colleagues who shared my progressive values. I have been called to serve the LGBTQ people on the university campus in a first-of-its-kind ministry. The priest I met that night became a lifelong friend, one who took Wade and me to dinner at a restaurant that featured pictures of all kinds of pictures of dogs, drawings, photos, and paintings of dogs on all of its walls. And when I introduced Wade to the city of Philadelphia a few years ago. The world is charged with the grandeur of God, confirmed what has become my lifelong spiritual viewpoint, that the divine can be seen throughout creation if we but open our eyes and our ears and our hearts to its values, truth, beauty, and love. The poet who created that line followed his fellow Jesuits' theology that all that we see and experience is in an evolutionary process, which is why the school of thought has been called process theology, process philosophy, in short, process thought. That Jesuit's name was Teilhard de Chardin, a French paleontologist and Roman Catholic priest, whose books I studied in college along with other process theologians and philosophers, such as the American Charles Hartshorne, the French Henry Bergson, and the British Alfred Nord Whitehead. Granted, this is a little too much academia to be immediately helpful, but I present it simply to show this is a serious line of thinkers who have thought deeply and written much about this school of thought. All this was predated historically by a simpler version of process thinking that goes back to the rural Celtic monks, men and women, at first pagan, which I think of as another way of saying open-minded and open-hearted, and then Christian, who believed the holy is revealed in nature, in everything from a baby's face to what they called thin places in the natural world, where the heavenly and holy and divinity itself shines through to and in the regular world in which we live. These were known as Celtic Christians, and the signposts of their extension across the British Isles and Europe are the Celtic crosses placed in front of places of worship or within graveyards, all bearing carved, interweaving threads and knots, much like your own symbol that you have on your bulletin, that little circle around. Is a Celtic representation, representing how the heavenly and earthly are interwoven throughout the world, even our universe. One early Celtic Christian writer described it as Christ walking among us in two shoes, one being in sacred texts such as the Bible, and the other being in nature. None of this needs to be believed or affirmed for the story that follows, but I offer it as a foundation, an intellectual scaffolding of reason on which I hang my story of our rescue dogs, Calvin and Hobbes. Golden Retriever lab mixes who taught us much about the spiritual life without speaking so much as a word. A member of this congregation, as I mentioned, Charlene, suggested that I talk about them in this talk, and that's why I'm doing this. So you can blame Charlene. Actually, I hope to give her a copy of the talk. We sometimes run into her on our morning walks we used to take with Calvin and Hobbes. Like our Celtic and spiritual ancestors, I believe the flora and fauna of the natural world offer as much wisdom and grace and hope as all the written texts that have been recognized as holy and sacred, even of God. That's why we need to hear from scientists as much as we listen to religious thinkers. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. And to see it, hear it, feel it, touch it, and smell it, we need to attend to those observers of our natural world and universe, whom we call scientists, poets, artists, journalists, philosophers, teachers, writers, mystics, and yes, even or maybe especially our pets. Our dog Calvin came to us as one of a litter of puppies brought the day of his adoption to the Atlanta Humane Society. It so happens that NPR, by the way, announced this week that the DeKalb Animal Shelter has an overabundance of pets available for adoption. So if my talk today encourages you to adopt a dog or cat or some other creature, the cost of doing so has been decreased. It's both an easy and a delightful way to see the world with a different set of eyes and sniff the world with an additional nose. By the way, did you know that the Atlanta Humane Society and similar sanctuaries in other cities were originally established for the welfare of women and children as well as animals? Women and children and animals were all mistreated, disregarded, used, and abused. taken for granted and ignored as if they had not been made in the image of God and divinely inspired. This same mistake, or may I say heresy, has been committed when it comes to the environment and is at the root of what is understatedly called climate change. It is also the heresy of racism and sexism and homophobia and all forms of othering. The cure for all of these sins is our own transformation in recognizing that all that is holy and sacred, in need of tending. The most important thing that Calvin and Hobbes taught us. The spiritual life could be described as opening our eyes and ears and nose, our minds and our hearts to this truth, which we are each given a lifetime to achieve. I think I've mentioned to you in a previous talk that Einstein famously said that time itself exists so that everything doesn't happen all at once. Thus, we are given a lifetime of experiences to realize our spiritual enlightenment, that all that is deserves our attention, even our regard. My childhood experience was of the family dog occasionally biting me, bringing me pain and tears and fear. Most of us have something in our childhood or youth that, so to speak, bit us, literally or metaphorically, bringing us pain and tears and fear. Maybe we were bullied or ridiculed or punished or abused. We might have been limited by finances or education or religious expectations, or by mental or physical or learning disabilities, causing us pain and tears and fear. We might have been hurt by love or friendship or even vocationally. By contrast, a biting dog seems tame. But what I needed to do was overcome my pain and tears and fear. And what helped me do that was the very thing, the very creature that initially caused my pain and tears and fear. I began a lifelong transformational process by which I befriended dogs. A transformation ultimately occasioned by welcoming first Calvin and then Hobbes into our home. Calvin taught me so much about life that his teachings, his example, prompted a book entitled Unleash the Wit and Wisdom of Calvin the Dog, dedicated, quote, to all the homeless philosophers in shelters throughout the world. Calvin pontificated on everything from the kindness of strangers to the edible complex to being close to the ground. The idea for the book came from Calvin receiving a letter from my mother's beagle, and he began writing his thoughts with my help between my speaking engagements and writing my own books about being gay and Christian. Speaking of speaking engagements, an irony of my life is that public speaking it was an experience of my youth, much like being bitten by the family dog. I attended a parochial junior high where in 7th grade I was nominated for something that required me to give a testimony of my faith to the entire student body. I have been very shy as a child, literally hiding behind my mother's skirts when possible. So the idea of giving a speech to hundreds of 7th, 8th, and 9th graders and our teachers frightened me. I was not coached on how to do this, how even to do public speaking, let alone how to share intimate details of what I believed. On the school auditorium stage, I hemmed and hawed, stumbling out words until I was finally laughed off stage. I was humiliated. It would have been less frightening to have been bitten by a dog. Public speaking is believed to be number one of most people's fears. The irony is that as a gay activist in society and in the church, I was called upon to give my testimony as a gay man and as a gay religious person over and over again to hundreds of strangers in hundreds of venues, strangers who were often hostile and judgmental and unkind. As I said earlier, most of us have had something in our childhood or youth that, so to speak, bit us, literally or metaphorically, bringing us pain and tears and fear. Alongside my initial experience of our family dog biting me, this experience of public speaking was worse. Again, the only way I could overcome my fear of public speaking was by befriending the task, by writing out everything in advance. So this is my teleprompter. Our dogs would undoubtedly be reminding me at this point to get back to the point, as if I were distracted from giving them a dish of water or food or taking them for a walk. Dogs, like good existentialists, become single-mindedly focused on the now. So I return to Calvin and how we encountered Hobbes. I occasionally took Calvin to Grant Park for a longer walk to run and play, and one day we happened on another dog that seemed lost and unattached. Calvin wouldn't let me get near this stranger, so I took Calvin home, came back with a spare leash and collar, hoping to restore this stray to her home before a passing car hit her. Upon my return, I couldn't see her immediately, but some homeless men who hung out in the park graciously pointed me to where she had ventured. It was not lost on me that homeless persons were helping me rescue a homeless dog, and I waved my thanks. The lost dog saw me, but I had not thought to bring a treat to lure her close. So I simply sat down on the grass and waited. Cautiously, she began walking circles around me, getting closer and closer until she finally let me put on the collar and attach the leash. I brought her home, carefully and slowly introducing her to Calvin, then posted signs around the park to locate her owner. I did not know at the time that Grant Park was a dumping ground for unwanted dogs. I once met a local in the park walking his 3 dogs, each of whom he had found abandoned in the park. Anyway, though I got several phone calls responding to my notices, none of them just matched the description of the dog I had found. I must admit that by the end of the first week, I got nervous when the calls came, as I had already fallen in love with her. I had named Calvin for the Swiss theologian, but Hobbes I named for the tiger in the comic strip, Calvin and Hobbes, because she had the same playful energy and brought me joy. Both Calvin and Hobbes helped me find Wade, which is a whole nother story. They helped me narrow my search for a lifelong partner by serving as a kind of litmus test of those I dated. How they responded to Calvin and Hobbes told me a lot about their character and their kindness. When Wade joined our household, Calvin and Hobbes helped us understand what it meant to be a family. As I've mentioned, we took walks together, greeting neighbors and their pets, enjoying the neighborhood, paying attention to its flora and fauna, streets and fences and houses, talking amongst ourselves, mourning a fallen tree, celebrating a new house or a new house renovation, taking lessons from how our neighbors have designed their yards or what trees, shrubs, or flowers they have planted. Calvin and Hobbes enlarged our view of family as they attracted pats on their heads from strangers, children's smiles, waves from seniors, sniffs from other dogs, and enjoyed a variety of dog sitters and dog walkers who were transgender, Muslim, lesbian, or autistic. Calvin and Hobbes were as outgoing as we were. I joked that they were always looking for their next family. As they aged, they taught us how to edit our walks and take more naps and remain hydrated. In his book, Calvin wrote, quote, "Every dog, almost by definition, is essentially an existentialist. We live for the moment. Time is a human construct, so death is difficult for us to grasp. Death, to me, is my human's absence. That's why I wag my tail so heartily when I see them again, for their presence is resurrection. These constant resurrections prevent me from thinking that any death is permanent." When Calvin passed, we took Hobbes for her morning walk. Suddenly, Hobbes started pulling on her leash, and we realized we had been joined by a Calvin look-alike, bounding alongside us, only younger and more energetic, whose golden fur was now a shimmering silver white. As I wrote in my book on death, I chose to take it as a sign that somewhere Calvin was happy. In my heart, in my memories, I wrote, "Calvin is always happy and will always be."